welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a pretty in-depth video on the Acura Legend and the Acura NSX oil filter. For those who are unfamiliar, the block architecture of both cars are essentially the same, and for that reason they really use the same oil filter. But we're going to talk about the differences in grades between the different oil filter tiers that you can get. So between like high performance, daily driver, and economy. There's a lot of misconceptions and again misinformation out there about oil filters, and people really associate a brand or a specific brand name with high quality oil filtration when that might not necessarily be the truth. And while we can't really do an in-depth analysis in a real-world example where we actually test these oil filters by sending oil through them just because of cost reasons, we're really going to take a look at the composition of the oil filter, the media filtration specs when available, as well as the quality aspects behind the construction of these oil filters. So it's really going to be a telling story today about what people think are good oil filters for these cars and what is really a good oil filter for these cars. So I wanted to set that up on the front end. Also, I want to note that there aren't a lot of oil filters available for these cars, and the reason behind that is because of the size of filter that we're dealing with. They have a unique thread pitch as well as a unique diameter, and that really challenges manufacturers today to make an oil filter just specific to these cars. So when we talk about what's available in the market, it's really slim pickings, but there are some high quality oil filters out there still available. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the information on these oil filters and what might be a good oil filter for you if you're looking for a high performing oil filter or if you're just looking for a daily option. So let's dig into the facts.
Before we can go ahead and show you everything that we're going to talk about today, when we do our analysis of the filters, we have to set you up with some baseline information. So I'm going to spend a few minutes introducing you to what makes up a good filter versus what is made up of a low quality filter so that you can understand the differences between the two when we start to dive into the actual composition of oil filters. So just to level set everybody, oil filters are essential components in any engine to ensure that remains clean and free of contamination. This section provides a foundation understanding of the function and significance. When we talk about the differences in oil filters, it's important to understand the purpose of oil filters and how they play a role in making sure that your engine is high performing as well as long living. So, oil filters, like I said, trap dirt and harmful particles, ensuring that the oil remains clean and effective throughout the duration of your oil change cycle, enhancing the longevity of your oil itself as well as reducing the wear and tear on vital engine components, affecting its longevity. I want to go ahead and tackle up front one of the misconceptions about oil filters themselves. A lot of people associate a brand with a high quality filter. Every company out on the market has different tiers of oil filters designed to meet different demands. Yet not one oil filter from a specific brand will cover every scenario. And what I mean by that is that people who gravitate towards certain brands like Wix or Fram, we can see here on the screen that Wix has three different tiers. They have their XP filter, they have their premium filter, and they have their ProTech or white label filter. And there's a difference in between each one, and not only a difference between each tier that is significant, but also in its purpose. So what I mean by that is each filter tier has a different composite, a different makeup, and is designed with different quality controls in play. And when we talk specifically about a brand, it's important to note the difference in between these tiers because a lot of people will say a Wix filter is a good filter. And yes, while they do make a really good XP filter, their bottom tier is really not that great when you talk about what we're intending to use it for in the scenarios in which we would like to have that high quality protection. And so when we take a look at Fram, for example, a lot of people have the inverse thought, where Fram is not as high quality of a filter, and that's true on their lower tier. they actually make a really good filter on their higher end. As you can see here, their synthetic endurance filter is a very high quality filter when we talk about the whole scale. So we inversely can't say that a Wix filter is always good, and we also cannot say that a Fram filter is always bad. We have to take a look at the filter and the tier that that filter lives in. Additionally, I want to take a moment to focus on marketing because marketing plays a huge role in consumers' thoughts about what is a high quality filter and what isn't a high quality filter. So on the screen here, you can see a Rock Auto screenshot from their catalog showing that there is a higher quality Wix filter at the bottom here for $6.37. And note the part number, it's 51378. Now, if we take a look at the very top of our screen, we see Ultra Power 51378 for $1.04. These two filters are the same, but the way that they're marketing them, it makes the consumer believe that if they spend $6.37 on the Wix branded filter, that they're going to get a daily or standard replacement filter as opposed to the Ultra Power, which is going to be on their economy end. And I assure you that these are very much the same filters. We'll actually dive into how many different brands use the 51378 filter and the differences between the two. Hint, there's not a lot of differences between the two, if any. Additionally, some brands, like you see in the middle of the screen, called the Famous brand, which is a CarQuest Premium filter, take a variation of that Wix filter ID and just call it 85378. That is also a Wix filter. A lot of times what happens is that they take the catalog number and to compare it to a actual brand, they'll use a slightly different nomenclature so that they can call it a different filter under their brand, CarQuest brand. Additionally, if you take a look at this screen and look at all the different part numbers, you'll see Purolator part numbers scattered throughout. So I just wanted to call that out because I think that a lot of people get caught up in the marketing and there's really just rebranding going on here. On the screen here, we have the components of what makes up an oil filter: the steel shell, the filter media, the relief valve, the anti-drain back valve, and the gasketing material. All of these play a crucial part in what makes up a low quality or a high quality filter. So when we talk about the steel shell, we want to make sure that the steel shell is not too flimsy. Too flimsy will actually cavitate under pressure. Additionally, it will cause oil canning effect. All of these are really not desired properties of an oil filter, and so we want a nice hardy steel shell. Filter media is probably one of the more important aspects of an oil filter, as we know, because that is what protects our engine. They can be made up of paper, synthetic fibers, or a blend of the two. This is the component that traps the dirt, the metal shavings, and the other debris that floats through the engine. So we want to make sure that we have modern materials at play here and that we have an appropriate amount of filter media. Additionally, we have the relief valve or bypass valve, and this valve is activated when the filter media gets clogged or the oil is too thick, and we want to make sure that the pressure to activate isn't too low so that the oil bypasses the filter media when it's not clogged or too thick. And likewise, we don't want to be on the other end of the scale because if it's too hard to activate, then we start to starve the engine. Next, we have the anti-drain back valve. This can be made up of rubber or silicone and is designed to prevent the oil from draining out of the filter when the engine is off. So we want this to be high quality because it will make a good seal and then that will prevent oil starvation at startup. And then lastly, we have the gasketing of the oil filter itself. This can actually be made of rubber or silicone as we'll start to see in some of the filters that we take a look at. And this is important because this is what's going to prevent the oil from leaking out between your engine and the filter, but also make sure that you maintain a good pressure here. When we talk about the material between silicone and rubber here in the next slide, you'll see why it's maybe important to have a different material here when we talk about sealing. I also want to spend a minute to talk about silicone versus rubber because we'll see as we open up these filters where they use silicone and where they are using rubber between the different qualities of filters. So on the screen here is a simple table that shows the benefits and disadvantages of silicone versus rubber. And what I want you to take away on this slide is simple. It's just that silicone is overall a better material to use when we talk about anti-drain back valves. We can see silicone being used in the gasketing material of the oil filter itself up against the engine, and that may be a great focus on a high quality filter for like track use, but for daily, it's not necessarily a huge need. So we're going to start to dive into different filter media types. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a wide range here. We've got cellulose, a mixture, and we've got synthetic. So let's take a look at cellulose here on the screen. It's paper-based material and is used in standard filters, which is basically a way to say lower end filters. Sometimes they can be reinforced with resin to help with durability, and that allows the filter media to last longer. So you'll see a difference sometimes between oil filters that will say good for 3,000 miles and difference in 5,000 miles. What they're doing is they're enhancing it more often with resin to help it last that extra 2,000 miles. Advantages are that it's less expensive. You can pick up a cellulose filter for a couple bucks, sometimes under a couple bucks. I've seen oil filters that are less than $1, and they're just cellulose filters. They're easier to produce. They don't require a lot. You're basically just using paper wrapped around a construction. The disadvantages are they have limited filter capacity. They actually fill up quite quickly. And when you're talking about using synthetic fluids, which we'll get to in a future slide, you'll see that there's really a challenge to use cellulose filters in synthetic fluids at the same time. They're not as efficient. They're not designed to last as long and hold as much dirt as compared to their synthetic counterparts. And because of that, they start to lose their efficiency as time goes on pretty quickly. And again, low endurance, meaning that they don't last long. To help with some of the disadvantages of pure cellulose filters, companies will often blend synthetic media with cellulose to help strike a balance between the cost of a filter and the benefit of a filter. This relates to more sales on the consumer side because many consumers don't want to cheap out and they really don't want to spend a lot of money on a pure synthetic filter. This also helps the filter media remain consistent in its uniformities. This also helps add some longevity or endurance to the filter. Some of the disadvantages of a blended media filter is the endurance is not that great when we talk about full synthetics because we can't get away from the pure cellulose component of it. Filtration is often less efficient than full synthetic, too. Lastly, we want to talk about synthetic medias. Full synthetic media is actually a proprietary technology with a lot of companies. And the reason being is that it's their composition or their development that leads to this full synthetic. So unlike paper, they're actually designing the filter media in-house oftentimes or working with a company to help design it based off of the properties that they would like or the filtration that they would like. So we can't actually say all synthetic medias are the same because each company has some sort of variation in their synthetic composition or their design to help achieve whatever they're targeting. The advantages here is pretty straightforward. We've maximized our performance in the filtration efficiency, meaning that we can target specific micron sizes, which we'll start to see when we talk about ISO testing with these filters. And additionally, they last longer, so they don't break down very easily, unlike their cellulose counterparts. Cellulose breaks down very easy, and so it has a very short life expectancy, whereas the synthetic media can last a long time. And in many cases, it can last up to 20,000 miles. So even though we don't advise this, you can use these oil filters over multiple oil filters or oil changes. they're designed also to maximize the flow. So we'll take a look in a future slide here about the efficiency and the pressure drop related to the different filter media types. But just know that synthetic is really well designed, specifically designed to maximize flow as well as target the particle size or the micron target for the particles that they're trying to capture. The disadvantages here are pretty straightforward. Because of the R&D that are put into the filter media, that carries on to obviously the cost, and there's also a pretty large cost to produce something like a synthetic as well. So you see that kind of being passed along to the consumer here. On the screen here, we have two completely different ends of the filter media spectrum. We have cellulose media, which is our paper product, and we have that synthetic media. In this case, it's called dual glass. And what I want you to take note of here is that what happens with cellulose filters is that they basically reach their life expectancy really quick in their filtration. So as dirt builds up on that filter media, we see a large pressure drop, and that pressure drop happens almost immediately. So it's basically like hitting a wall. Once that wall is hit, pressure drops, and so you start to starve your engine a little bit there. Additionally, when we use a synthetic, we're able to maintain that flow or maintain that pressure longer, and the dirt capacity or the buildup on that media takes longer to occur. So when we talk about the differences of oil filters in the future here in a couple minutes, we're going to take note that a cellulose filter, it doesn't have as long of a life as a synthetic. Now, does that mean that you need to switch to a synthetic media? No, because if you stay on top of your oil changes, it's perfectly fine to use a cellulose media. Additionally, we'll talk about the role that synthetic oils play in both synthetic and in cellulose media. So we'll want to factor that in too. But for right now, just know that the two differences have to deal with dirt capacity and the pressure drop. Oil filter efficiency actually has an industry target, and that industry target is set at 99% at 20 microns, or the particle size that they're targeting, without impacting the flow of oil to the engine. And the ISO test or International Standard Test is 4548-12. That tests the oil filter efficiency. And additionally, we want to make sure that we're targeting the right micron size, but we're also trying to target the impact of oil flow or the lack of oil flow to the engine. So we're trying to strike that balance again between creating a protection on the particle side without jeopardizing the flow of oil to the engine. What's interesting here when we talk about NSX and Legend filters is that we see a skew on these oil filters more towards the lower end scale. So when we go to purchase an oil filter for our car, it's more commonly on the lower end than the higher end. And so what does that really mean when we talk about oil changes and the pairing of synthetic oils with some of these lower end oil filters? So if you recall, oil filters on the lower end primarily use cellulose or cellulose with resin to help create that structural rigidity. Well, when you use synthetic oils, those synthetic oils allow the filter media to pack up pretty quickly because they have the ability to clean engines. Additionally, the smaller uniformity size of synthetic oils allows it to pass through the cellulose media pretty easily, which leads to a lack of filtration. So we have two actually pretty significant concerns here when we pair synthetic oils with lower end cellulose filters. Now, you can always say that if you use oil changes on a regular basis, you can kind of mitigate these concerns. But what I want you to know is that if you're using synthetic oils and you're using a cellulose filter, we actually have somewhat of a concern here because cellulose isn't really designed or wasn't really designed to perform well with synthetic oils to begin with. And you see that even when you take a look at the filters themselves through the manufacturing side. Manufacturers will say this filter isn't designed to be used with synthetic oils. And likewise, if you want to use a higher end filter and actually benefit from all the benefits of a synthetic filter media, you should be using synthetic oils. Additionally, when you're using a blend between the medias of cellulose and synthetic in the oil filter, you can sometimes get that balance between using synthetic oils and a synthetic blend. Overall, though, if you use synthetic oils with a cellulose filter over time, you could increase engine wear because it's not providing full protection through that filter media. Additionally, the filter will start to pack up quicker because as the synthetic oils actually start to clean, and we see this with that video that we did with Restore and Protect from Valvoline, you may actually introduce more debris into that filter media and increase that pressure drop faster. So before we dig into the oil filters that we're going to be talking about in this video, the specific ones, I want to tackle the last question, which is, does size matter? Does a tall filter outperform a short filter? And the answer is not really, because the reason why they had to use tall filters, and you don't see them anymore today, has to do with the aforementioned challenges around cellulose filter media. By increasing cellulose in the can, we're able to extend the life of the oil filter because now we have more filter media that can be built up with, so more dirt can be captured, and we can ensure that the pressure drop related to cellulose media is mitigated a little bit by increasing the size. The challenge here is that we want to increase the size so that more cellulose media is available for filtration without actually making it too big so that it can't fit in the car. So usually what we see is larger filters are antiquated or older filters that use cellulose, and they're able to reduce the concerns around pressure drop that way. Now, there is really no advantage anymore to using tall media when we have modern technology in filtration media, but there is some advantage to using a tall filter with cooling. So, for example, all the oil that is in your engine as it passes through the oil filter becomes external to the engine. And if your oil filter is positioned in a opportune way to capture some of the cooling air as you drive, you can drive down some of the oil temperature that way. Now, I would make an argument that if you needed to do that for the purposes of track use, for example, that an external oil cooler would probably provide a far better protection than any benefit that you would get from a tall filter. Moreover, when we take a look at shorter filters, we actually see that the benefits of shorter filters comes into play by allowing it to be smaller or more compact, easier to fit in, also not jeopardizing anything because we have that synthetic filter media that is inside the filter itself, providing that protection. So we can drive down costs that way because we're not using as much material, not generating as much waste, and the filter media is allowing us to actually increase the benefits of using these smaller filters. So there's the offset there. The advantages of using a shorter filter actually outweigh the advantages of a taller filter because shorter filters build pressure faster, so that reduces dry cold starts. And they have increased flow rates because they're able to pass through that filter media, but they're also not caught up in the oil filter can itself. If you've made it up to this point in the video, now you get rewarded with knowing which oil filters we'll be taking a deep dive into. On the screen here, you'll see the oil filters themselves, the associated part numbers, and whether they are discontinued currently. We'll be taking a look at the Bosch Premium 72200, the Fram Pro 8212, the Fram ExtraGuard 8212, they are different filters, the Microgard Select, and that is a Premium Guard XL filter. The Wix, the classic Wix 51378, which is also a Napa Gold Proformer CarQuest Premium Auto Extra Wix ProTech and Manhumol filter. And we also have a Wix 51378 new old stock from the 90s made out of Japan as opposed to the current South Korea plant. So it'll be interesting to take a deep dive into that one and compare the two. One of the crowd favorites, which is the Ultra 8, the Hastings Baldwin 462 filter or B1422 filter, the Purolator Classic 24484 filter, the Pentius 8212 filter, the BeckArnley 0418072 and the currently supplied Honda OEM by Mahle, ending in 306. To dive into our filter analysis here, we went ahead and opened up each filter to take a look at the contents, weigh them, and take a look at the filter media as well as the filter media surface area. We comprised a pretty comprehensive spreadsheet ranking most of the specifications of each filter and some that we were able to obtain on internet searches, such as the manufacturer, so that we remained objective and non-biased here. Before we dive into the filter shown on the screen, I want you to know that all the information will be at the top of the screen for you to pause and review at your leisure. I do want to call out that I will go over a few important criteria in each filter so that you know what is the important standouts. So on the screen we have the Bosch 72200, country of origin USA, theoretical volume of 400,000 millimeters cubed, a can thickness of 0.35 millimeters, a bypass relief valve measured at 2.7 pounds of force, filter media composition of cellulose, a filter media surface area of 128.1 square inches, and an anti-drain back valve that is made of rubber. Here we have the Bosch Premium filter. Take a look here. Now this can came dented. That's already not a great sign. It is really flimsy. I mean, really flimsy. So that's not great to start with. Not my favorite spring. Take a look at the lid here. You have a little bit of rusting going on right there. Not great. Let's take a look at the construction. There is still machining grease actually on the threads of this. Not great. We have a rubber square gasket here, but we do see some ribbing there. This is a rubber anti-drain back valve. Not great. Very flimsy and actually feels a bit like it's degrading a little bit, or there's some sort of material on there. You can kind of see that in the camera, some white. It's rubbing off and kind of getting on my hands. Let's see here, we have a 75.8 millimeter tall can. You notice that the can and the filter do not go all the way to the edge. We have some rather odd patterns of filter media here. You can see the waves here, but we also have some breaks, and we also have some weird gaps going on. You have a fairly large butterfly effect going on here. Not great. The density of filter media right here is low. It feels like a really, really thin filter too. Like I could probably twist this. It doesn't feel very stout. So not a great filter, but from Bosch. Next up, we have the Fram Pro FP8212, country of origin China, theoretical volume 390, can thickness 0.5, bypass relief valve measured at 1.9, filter media composition is cellulose, filter media surface area measured out at 86.9, anti-drain back valve material is silicone, and the recommended oil type is conventional. Here we have the Fram Pro series. This is discontinued. But I was able to get my hands on it for a comparison to the Fram ExtraGuard. So we have our spring here, which I like to see. And the can is fairly stout. A little bit of flexing, but overall quite impressive for a Fram filter. Rather small canister at 47 millimeters tall. A little bit of irregularity there, but that could be where it's binding, where they bind it together, because there's no metal binding. Otherwise, pretty uniform across its filter media. Rather nicely constructed canister there. Take a look at the lid here. We do have a silicone anti-drain back valve. And actually, this silicone anti-drain back valve is really tight, and I like that.
I like the fact that it was well seated into that. we I do not think that that is rust. I think that that is, yep, this is just a little bit of transfer from the silicone anti-drain back valve. Otherwise, pretty good there. Nice rubber, although it does move, so it's not really seated well in there. So it shouldn't be that easy to move. We'd like a little bit of a tighter tolerance on that. Otherwise, I do like that gasket is nice and rounded and uniform. It feels really good to the fingers, and nice machining on the threads. So I guess that's why Fram is one of the better known filter companies. They do know how to make a filter every once in a while.
Next up, we have the Fram ExtraGuard PH8212, same country origin of China, as a theoretical volume of almost 460, a can thickness of 0.5, the bypass relief valve measured in at 5.3. The filter media composition is a cellulose synthetic blend. We do know that it has a 95% efficiency at 20 microns, filter media surface area of 93. It does unfortunately have a rubber anti-drain back valve, and it is recommended for synthetic or synthetic blend motor oils.
Okay, here we have the Fram ExtraGuard. This is the consumer grade Fram filter that you can pick up anywhere. What I find interesting right out of the gate is that we've got some sort of oil down at the bottom. Probably from machining. Not great to see that in a filter, but probably not the worst thing. Let's take a look at the can construction. Fairly stout can construction here. We don't see the typical Fram grip at the bottom, which is interesting, but maybe that's not every filter that they do that with. Do like to see the spring, although that is a fairly weak spring. Not what I usually like to see, though. As opposed to the Fram Pro, we have a rubber anti-drain back valve. So not as good as the Pro series. Here we have our can lid. I see some really weird machining here, really rough machining. You can see that on camera. That is fairly interesting. Really jagged. So if you were to put those two together, that's how that sits. Very interesting to see it so jagged like that. Let's see about the inside threads, how that is. Catching my finger a little bit there, so not great. Let's see here. We got a nice rubber gasket. Pretty typical. This is a flat gasket, as opposed to the Pro Series one, which was a rounded one. So an interesting change there. This one is seated better than the Pro one, though. So that is the Fram ExtraGuard filter. Let's take a look at the canister here. This is a 51 millimeter tall canister. Take a look at the filter media. Pretty uniform, I'd say, not horrible. Gluing is not bad, although there's a lot of glue right there. Otherwise, not horrible. You'd like to see the glue at least not protrude up above if it is going to be seen. So we do see a little bit of excess gluing there. Otherwise, not horrible. Uniform filter media, a little bit of a butterfly effect there on the binding, but not horrible. Otherwise, fairly well constructed can from the Fram ExtraGuard.
First up, for the Wix family, we're going to use a Japanese-sourced Wix 51378. It has a theoretical volume of 565, almost 566. It has a can thickness of 0.5, a bypass relief valve measured in at 2.1 pounds of force, cellulose filter media. We do know from historical records that it does have a 95% efficiency at 44 microns, which is a fairly large size micron. It has a filter media surface area of 217.8. It does have a rubber anti-drain back valve, and its recommended oil is conventional.
All right, and we're going to start with the OG for the Wix filter line, and this is the one that's made in Japan. Take a look at the can here. A little flimsy, but not horrible. Pretty stout for as big as it is. This is pretty well constructed. So not bad there. Take a look at the lid here. Very well machined so far here. No sharp edges. Really smooth so far. One little snag right there, but otherwise pretty smooth. Let's take a look at the gasket. We have a rounded gasket, rubber of course, not surprising for its age. Not bad there. We have a rubber as opposed to a silicone anti-drain back valve, but it's not at least deteriorating like some of the other ones. Take a look at the filter canister here. We have a tall 90mm can here. Take a look at the filter media. Alright, so not bad. We have a little bit of a irregularity there. Should be a little bit closer together. They are using glue to hold it together, so that's interesting that we see that there. Otherwise, not bad construction. So the Japanese constructed one, besides its probably dated construction, otherwise not bad.
So next up, we're going to tackle the modern Wix filter, the 51378, also known as the Napa Gold, the Performer, the CarQuest Premium, Auto Extra, Wix ProTech, Man and Hummel, all the same filter. So we're going to take one of those filters and just break it down for you. And the country of origin is South Korea. The theoretical volume is about 407. The can thickness is 0.5. The bypass relief valve measured in at a whopping 8.3 pounds of force. The filter media composition is cellulose. We do know the efficiency of the filter is 95% at 29 microns. The filter media surface area is 86.25. It does have a silicone anti-drain back valve, and it is only recommended for conventional oils. Since the Wix 51378 really crosses over to multiple different brands of filters, I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple filters here to take a look at.
Here we have our first modern Wix filter, which is a Napa Gold. This would be an iteration of a 51378 filter, just like you saw from the Japanese one. So let's take a look at the can here. A little flimsy, certainly more flimsy than the Japanese constructed one. So not great there. Take a look at the spring. I see that this spring is actually not, it's almost flat, not really creating much of a spring effect here. And we see a little bit of oil canning, so not great construction right there. Prefer to see a better constructed spring, certainly not as flat. We have a silicone anti-drain back valve, which is nice to see. Pretty good there. Let's take a look at the lid. Oh, we see some jaggedness there. Not well machined, really. Really jagged, actually. Catches my finger quite a bit. Take a look at the threads. Ooh, not great on the threads either. Pretty chunky and catches my finger a couple times. And so let's take a look at the gasket. We have a rubber rounded gasket. Pretty well seated in there. Whoa, I take that back. It's not well seated. It rotates around. So that's not ideal. Take a look at the canister here. We have a 55mm canister on the Napa Gold. There's some irregular in spacing right there, but not horrible. We have some weird binding right there. I'm not sure why that is. It's certainly probably where the two filter media ends meet. Otherwise, not bad. Not seeing anything that stands out there. So that is the first modern Wix filter. Alright, so we have the 85378, or as we know it, the Wix filter 51378. Alright, so let's take a look at the components of this can. Pretty flimsy once again, so not surprising. Pretty comparable to the Napa Gold one that we saw earlier. Slightly different spring at the bottom here. It's not flat, which is good to see. It shouldn't be like the Napa one was. Do have a little bit of a defect there from machining. It's not quite perfect uniform construction. Good to see that anti-drain back valve in a silicone material again, which is nice. Okay, let's see if they did any better job on the machining here. A little bit, but not really. You still see some jaggedness there. Let's take a look at the threads. About the same as the Napa Gold one. We have the round and rubber gasket. Let's see if this one is planted any better. Nope, it is easily moved as well, so not great there. At least there's no rust on this. So we have our same canister. Oh, look at this. This is not good. We have a butterflying effect here, but then it also extends. Look at that gap there. That is a pretty wide gap. We would like to see a more uniform construction such as this. Oh, and we have another wide gap. Not great from this Wix filter. Okay. No excessive glue, otherwise not bad, but you can see we've got some wide gaps there going all the way around in two places. All right, let's see if they did better on the next one. All right, this is the Auto Extra version, which is AKA the Wix filter. Let's take a look at the can. This one is about the same as I would expect. Silicone anti-drain back valve, spring flat like the first one, the Napa Gold one, so not great. Really don't like to see that. Let's take a look at the machining. And it's about the same as the first one. Not great. So let's take a look at the threads. Oop, really bad machining right there. I want to see if I can pick that up on camera. It is chowdered, as they would say. Not sure if I'm picking that up, but right about there is a huge chunk, so not well machined threads at all. We have a rounded rubber gasket. See if, nope, this one moves as well. So they did not do a good job on that. No rust on the bottom though. So let's take a look at the filter media, see if they did any better job on this than the last one that we looked at. That is a much better showing compared to the last Wix filter that we saw. However, we do have a little bit of gluing right there. That's not horrible. Can't nitpick too much on this. You know, there's going to be little things like that. At least it's not rust. We'll put it that way. Yeah, it looks like a little bit of glue from the assembly process got on the top. Not ideal, but probably won't matter too much. Otherwise, much like the first one, the Napa Gold one. So something in between, or maybe different lots or different iterations of the Wix filter from the South Korea plant produced a little bit variation between the Napa Gold, the CarQuest, and the Auto Extra.
Next up on the list, we have a community favorite, the Ultra 8 filter out of China. The theoretical volume is 519. The can thickness is 0.5. The bypass relief valve measured in at 5.3. It has a filter media composition of cellulose. It is a filter media surface area of 161.1. It does have a silicone anti-drain back valve, and the recommended oil for this filter is conventional.
Now here's probably the one that most people are curious about. Here is the Ultra 8 filter that is very commonly associated with high quality in the community. We're going to take a look at this. So here is the internals of it. So interesting, this is the only spring that I've seen like this. Not horrible, but not great. I like to see the actual coiled spring as opposed to these. Some of the legs are a little weak, but not bad. Okay, so here we have the can itself. Fairly stout construction for as tall as it is. Not a bad can. I like to see the silicone anti-drain back valve here. So this is a interesting nice feature here. Let's take a look at the can lid before we go into the canister. So let's take a look at the can construction. We see a little bit of rust right there. Not great to see that. We also see some sort of adhesive right there, which is maybe not the biggest thing in the world. Take a look at our gasket here. So rubber gasket. One thing I like about this filter is it comes pre-lubricated, so you don't have to take any oil and lubricate the gasket here. They do that for you right from the manufacturer, so you get a nice tight seal, which is nice to see. Take a look at the threads. Yeah, pretty good machining on the threads as well. So not bad so far. Let's take a look at the canister. We have a 79 millimeter tall canister. I like the use of the square ends here as opposed to the round ends. I think that might be a unique feature of the Ultra 8. Take a look here on the inside, looks pretty good. Bottom looks pretty good. Uniform, look at how uniform that filter media is. You see we have a little bit of a wave here, but that's really nothing. That's right where it binds. So, I mean, this is one of the more uniform filter medias I've seen thus far. So, really nice showing by the Ultra 8. Quite impressed by that so far. So maybe it lives up to the hype. We'll see.
Next up, we have the Purolator Classic, the PPL24484, country origin of USA. It has a theoretical volume of 512, a can thickness of only 0.3, a bypass relief valve measured in at 3.8. It is a filter media composition of cellulose. It has a filter media surface area of 105. It has a rubber anti-drainback valve, and it is recommended for conventional oil only.
Here we have the Purolator Classic 4484 filter. I'll tell you right now, I'm already not impressed by it. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. Okay, so one of the flimsiest cans here, if not the flimsiest can. I mean, it is paper thin and really not great. So not a good can right out of the gate. I'm actually like deforming it and it's actually staying that way. So that's how you know that your can is not great, when it does that. And here is a good example of why I don't like these type of springs on the bottom. You see that? It's already showing some rippling or manufacturing defects here. It should not look like what they call oil canning here. This is actually defect. It actually can hinder performance. So not great there. Also, we have a rubber anti-drainback valve instead of a silicone one. Not surprised from what I've seen thus far. So let's take a look at the top of the can itself. No rust, well that's good. Ooh, really bad machining on the threads. I mean, it is just snagging my finger all the way around. So I will stop that. We'll take a look at the gasket. Flat gasket, pretty well seated in there. It is rubber instead of silicone. Okay, so let's take a look at the filter media. We've got a 76 millimeter tall can here. Here's our filter media, not going all the way to the edge by a lot. We are using a metal crimp here. And we have some irregular, and we also have, oh, that's from me cutting it probably. We also have some rather large butterflying here on the crimp, so that is not great either. Overall, not a good showing by Purolator with the Purolator Classic here.
Next up, we have the Pentius PLB8212 out of Korea. It has a theoretical volume of 467, a can thickness of 0.5, the bypass relief valve measured in only at 1.9, the filter media composition is cellulose, the filter media surface area is 116.9, the anti-drainback valve is rubber, and it is recommended for conventional use only.
Here we have the Pentius oil filter called the Trap, and can, pretty well constructed, not flimsy, feels okay in the hands. We have the spring here, that is pretty good, nice to see that. Fortunately, we have a rubber anti-drain back valve as opposed to a silicone one. Take a look at the lid here. See some really jagged edges here. You can see that on camera. So not great there. Take a look at the threads. Not bad, but a little bit of snagging going on there. We have a flat gasket here. Pretty well seated. We'll take a look at the canister. We have a 68 millimeter canister. Not bad. Construction. Let's see here. We got a little bit of a butterfly effect there. Take a look at the uniformity of it. Notice that the spacing is rather large in some areas and not large in others. And here's what I mean by that. So you can see large and then not large spacing. So look at that right there. So not uniform at all. Not great, especially when it's not on the crimp. So that is the Pentius.
Next up, we have the BeckArnley 0418072 out of Malaysia. The theoretical volume is 577. The can thickness is 0.5. The bypass relief valve measured in at 2.1. The filter media composition is cellulose. The filter media surface area is a whopping 227.1. The anti-drain back valve is rubber, and it is recommended for conventional motor oil only.
Here we have the BeckArnley filter. This is a tall filter. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. We have the spring, which I favor, although that does feel like a fairly weak spring compared to some of the other ones. The can itself, very well constructed for as tall as it is, and not really easily molded. We do have a rubber anti-drain back valve as opposed to a silicone. We have a rubber rounded gasket. Let's take a look here. No rust on this side, which is good to see. The threads could be smoother. There's a little bit catching my finger, not as well machined as some of the other ones. And then we have our 85 millimeter tall canister with a standard metal crimping there. Let's see, we've got a little bit of irregularity there in our filter media. Not bad though. Otherwise, pretty uniform, no excessive gluing, pretty clean and well constructed. Not bad from BeckArnley. Like to see a silicone anti-drain back valve and obviously a silicone gasket if possible.
Next up, we have the Baldwin LF462, also known as the B1422 out of the USA. It has a theoretical volume of almost 414. It has a can thickness of 0.5, a bypass relief valve of 3.4. It has a filter media composition of a claimed cellulose synthetic blend. We do know its efficiency rating is 98.7 at 27 microns, a filter media surface area of 116. It has a rubber anti-drain back valve, and it is acceptable for synthetic motor oil use. I will also point out the fact that when we opened up the filter media, it was the only filter media that had glued ends instead of crimped ends, which begs to question its quality.
Here we have the Baldwin filter. The can is pretty stout, not easily moved. It's a smaller can, meaning narrower than some of its counterparts, I believe. But otherwise, fairly good construction. We see here no rust. Otherwise, a nice constructed lid there. We are using a flat rubber gasket as opposed to a silicone. Not adhered in, but that's okay. It is pretty planted in the lid itself. Well machined, very well machined, actually, threads on this, so not bad. Disappointed to see the rubber instead of a silicone drain back valve. And then they also throw in this weird plastic piece, which I'm really not quite sure why. It's the only filter in the lot that does this. Maybe there's some significance to it, but that's how it sits, and then it goes onto the filter and obviously onto the lid. Now, not ideal. More components, and specifically plastic, not great to see in a filter, if I would say so. Here we have the filter. It is a 55 millimeter tall filter canister, and we have some irregular filter media, although they don't use a mill crimping, I see, so they're relying solely on glue. I wonder how well that is glued. Seems pretty decent. I can't pull it apart, although we will in a future video, or future part in this video. Otherwise, not extremely bad. I would say okay. They could make some simple improvements. They do have the spring that I like instead of the metal. I would say that this is not a bad choice, not the worst choice. Certainly not the best, though. This is the Baldwin filter.
Next up, we have the Microgard Select MSL 51378, also a Premium Guard XL filter out of Vietnam. It has a theoretical volume of 399, a can thickness of 0.7, which makes it the thickest can in the lot. It has a bypass relief valve of 2.1. It is made up of synthetic filter media. It has a filter media surface area of 94.8. We do know the filter efficiency, which is 99% at 25 microns. It has a silicone anti-drain back valve. It has a silicone O-ring, which is the only one in the lot to have that. It is recommended for synthetic motor oil.
Taking a look at the Microgard Select Extended Life, we see that it has a really good construction on the powder coating or the coating finish itself. It uses a pretty generic sticker to label it. A nice texture on there so you can get a firm grip. The can itself is not easily bent, which means that it is a well-constructed can. I do favor a spring personally, just because I feel like these are a bit stronger or stout compared to some of the other methods used. So that is in its favor. Also take a look at this silicone anti-drain back valve. This is a really nice construction, and it's nice to see a silicone product used. Also take a look at the finishing here. I take a look at the threads. I see that there is really good indication that high quality threading was performed here. I also really like the fact that they are using a silicone gasket here as opposed to a rubber gasket. And not that it matters a lot, but they have a rounded gasket as opposed to a flat gasket. So really good construction there. Now let's take a look at the filter media. We see a really even distribution of filter media, and then really typical right there where we've got the binding. No excessive gluing or messiness there. A little bit here on the can itself, but really that's not significant. Let me take a look at the bypass, and that's really well constructed. And this is a 47, that's what that 47 is, 47 millimeter tall filter. So that is really good. That is a nice high quality filter from SelectGuard, or Microgard Select, I should say.
Last on the list, we have the current Honda filter ending in part number 306. This Honda filter is made by Mahle. It comes out of Thailand. It has a theoretical volume of 402, a can thickness of 0.5, a bypass relief valve of 1.3. It is made of synthetic media. It does have a filter media surface area of 154. It does have a silicone anti-drain back valve, and it is recommended for synthetic motor oil.
Here we have the OEM filter by Mahle. You can see right there the OEM manufacturer, Honda. It is not as stout of a can as I would expect it. It's actually a little flimsy. fairly easy to mold. Although the end is rigid, the middle is pretty flexible. So not as I would have anticipated for the OEM filter. When I look at the bottom, I see some rust right here. That's not good. So really surprised to see rust on the inside of the filter canister here. Also, I will note that when I got this, that gasket was just as you see it. That is not pushed in all the way right there. So a little surprising. We can easily push it in, but I noticed that it's not in all the way. This is a rubber material instead of a silicone. It's not actually adhered in there. It's actually just resting in a lip. So not favorable. When I look at the threads, let's take a look at the threads here. I see some rust on the inside right there. Really surprising. Pretty smooth, however. Well machined otherwise. Okay. We have, this is what goes on the bottom where the filter rests on. Not my favorite design, but sufficient. So nothing bad about that. We do have a silicone anti-drain back valve. That's pretty nice to see. That's as I would expect it. Okay, take a look here. We have a 54 millimeter can. Let's see, fairly even distribution, no excessive gluing. Pretty nice. We have a little bit of a waver here in the filter material, but that's nothing to be alarmed by. Pretty good. I do see that there is something not quite, you can see where this color goes in. That's not quite uniform all the way across. I can't tell if that's glue. It feels like glue. So a little bit of weirdness there, maybe not significant. Otherwise, well-constructed can. Just surprised to see the rust on the bottom there.
So if we start to take a deeper dive and actually look at the data visually, we start to see some interesting information here. So on the screen is a bar chart with two lines across it, and the bar chart represents the pressure necessary to activate the relief valve. And the relief valve, just to remind you, is how the oil gets past the filter if the filter becomes clogged, or if the oil gets too thick. So we want that pressure relief valve to operate under a narrow spectrum so that it doesn't activate when the oil isn't too thick or when the filter media isn't clogged, and likewise it does activate when the inverse is true. So on the screen here we want the filters to live within that spectrum, and what we see here is that the Wix filter is way up out of the spectrum with a really high activated relief valve, which begs to question if it would actually trigger if the filter media became clogged. We have a couple other filters like the Ultra 8 and the Purolator and the Fram ExtraGuard that are living up there as well as that Baldwin just breaching that 3 pounds of force. But what we see is some really good performance out of the Microgard Select, the BeckArnley, the Pentius, surprisingly, the old NOS Wix filter, as well as the Fram and Bosch. Now, the Honda filter does perform a little bit under that spectrum, but that could just be a variation in the lot that we had. We would obviously need to measure over a couple different filters to have a normalized value for that. So it's not too concerning that it's underperforming there. So if you take a look at all of the theoretical volumes across all filters, they stack up like you have it here on the screen. The color differences denoting the difference between cellulose and synthetic or synthetic blend material. And the reason why I call that out is in the beginning of the video, as you recall, I mentioned that volume isn't the most significant component of a filter. It does have some benefits, but overall, filters have shrunk in size with the adoption of synthetic material. So if we take a look at the use of synthetic material across the filter spectrum, we see that the cellulose filters tend to have a larger volume of filter so that they have more to pack up with, and the synthetic filters have less volume. So here's what we have as a result. And if you have your eye on the uh, filters of the Microgard, the Honda Media, they're pretty neck and neck. And then the only standout is the Fram ExtraGuard, which I'll remind you is a synthetic blend. On this bar chart, we have the same filters and their filter media surface areas this time. So if you recall, a cellulose filter media tends to have a larger surface area so they can pack up with more dirt and have longer lifespan. And unfortunately, we see some low performers when we look at the cellulose filters, such as the Wix filter is on the low end, as well as the Fram Pro. If we look at the synthetic or synthetic blend filters denoted in orange, we can see that their surface area is quite large, even though they are synthetic filters. So we see a benefit here and possibly higher quality. Next is our collated data shown on the chart here. And what we see is the price paid, the filter media score between 1 to 3, showing cellulose, a blend, and synthetic, a bypass valve rating of 1 to 3 based on their pressures, an anti-drain back valve rating of 1 to 2 based on rubber or silicone use, a gasket rating of 1 to 2 based on rubber or silicone use, and a round flat gasket where the rounded gasket has a tendency to seal better over prolonged periods of time versus a flat, so we gave it a 1 to 2 score there, and a overall 1 to 5 score where 1 is bad and 5 is great in build quality. If you take a look at the overall scores in column A, B, you can see the scores are pretty significant here on the scale of low to high end, where we see a top score of 17 for the Microgard Select and a low score of 9 for both the Bosch and the Purolator Classic. So we can actually tell from this what is a good quality filter versus a bad or poor quality filter. The Honda filter probably would have performed very well. Unfortunately, it lost out to the Microgard Select in two areas. One, we found rust in the canning material, and we also showed that there was a rubber gasket instead of a silicone gasket, which the Microgard Select seems to use. So overall, kudos to the Microgard Select. Next, we'll take a look at how these prices stack up against their overall score. So the last set of data I'm going to show you before we crown the overall victor is the price versus the overall score from our analysis. And we can see a clear discrepancy between the top performers being the Microgard Select and the Honda Mahle filter. So both stacked up pretty well as far as the score, 17 versus 15, and it could have been a clear difference between just the unique filter that we got on the Honda filter that drew the difference, and it would have been pretty neck and neck at that point. However, when we compare the acquisition cost of both filters, we see that the Microgard Select at only $9.99 with a score of 17 far exceeds the performance and the value of the Honda Mahle filter at $26.77. So that leads us to what we now know as the best filter in the lot, which is the Microgard Select Extended Life filter.
So after our in-depth analysis, we've reached the conclusion that the Microgard Select Extended Life is the best premium filter out on the market today. At just $9.99, you get a synthetic filter media at 99% efficiency. You get a silicone O-ring and a silicone anti-drain back valve in a nice packaging. When you compare it to the OEM filter, the 306 part number specifically, you see that at $27 almost, that filter really is struggling to compete with a product such as the Microgard Select at just $9.99. So if you're looking for that top tier filter for your first generation NSX or your second generation Legend, just know that that is a standout filter in this market. As well as you may not need to go that route if you're looking for a daily option. So if you're looking for a daily option, the Ultra 8 filter, which is now discontinued but still can be found, is a good alternative for those that don't want to go to that premium tier necessarily. This filter has a great construction uniformity in its filter media, as well as that silicone anti-drain back valve is really surprising in a filter that's this old. So if you can get one of these filters and you're looking for a daily option, you can do that. It saves you a couple bucks on spending for your oil change. Now, when we look at everything in the whole spectrum of oil filters that we took a look at, we also noticed that there are some misinformation or misconceptions about certain brands, such as that Wix 51378 filter. That filter really has some concerning properties to it, such as its relief valve. It takes such a high pressure to activate that relief valve that it really begs to question whether it would serve the engine by protecting it if that filter media ever got packed up, or if the oil got too thick and that relief valve needed to activate, it might not actually activate. And that was measurable over a couple different variations of that 51378 part number. So we took a look at the CarQuest one, the Auto Extra, and the Napa Gold, as well as a base Wix filter. And that relief valve really just was that high of an activation level to get it to open up that relief valve, which begs to question that whether it would do that engine well in protecting it. So just take into consideration that there are some good alternatives. I actually favor the Fram ExtraGuard compared to that Wix filter option, just because it uses synthetic blend material, which is better than what is used in that Wix one, as well as the relief valve activation was lower. So overall, I think that's a better alternative and is actually a lower price option compared to that Wix filter more often than not. There was a wide variety of prices that we saw, so I paid anywhere from about 68 cents for that Auto Extra one, all the way up to about $13 for the Napa Gold one. So if you're looking for a filter that is premium or slightly premium quality compared to the Wix filter, the Fram ExtraGuard is actually a better option here. So with all that being said and done, leave a comment down below about which oil filter that you prefer, and I hope you learned something on this video. At least you now know the options that are afforded to you and which one stood out as a great filter versus not such a good filter or a great filter, and we'll see you on the next one.